Okay, we are 5 minutes past the hour. Let's get it started. We have, I think, not majority of the registrants, but we have many of you here. So good morning or good afternoon, good evening to those of you in European or Asian time zone. Welcome to the first virtual booth of the Computer Vision for Agriculture workshop at the ICLR conference. It's a new experience for all of us, so we are excited to have the Rockefeller Foundation and the Meridian Institute, who's working with Rockefeller, to join us today. Evan Tachovsky from Rockefeller and Jennifer Miles and Seth Blom from Meridian Institute will be coordinating and moderating this session. We're so excited for the announcement they're going to make about the shaping basically a new fund for labeled data. I will let Evan take the podium. There's no podium, but the virtual one.
Awesome. Thank you, Howard. Thank you so much for having us, and thank you everyone for joining on your various time zones. And I know this is a bit of a marathon, and so I'm so excited to have you here with us today. My name is Evan Tachovsky. I'm a director and lead data scientist at the Rockefeller Foundation. In that role, I both lead our team that does data science for the foundation's grantees, and then also participate in grant making and impact investing to help fund new projects and assets to improve the use of data science out in the world. So today we'll be talking about a new initiative that we're going to launch soon. This is actually the first time we've really talked about it publicly, so we're kind of in soft launch mode. None of this is private, but this is probably the first time we'll be running through it with such an illustrated audience. We're going to try to do two things. So first is, roughly present the idea and the structure of this project to you all. And then second, keep most of the time for discussion. So we're going to attempt to use the sort of breakout feature so that we don't have everyone crowding one chat. And then myself, Jennifer, and Seth will be moderating hopefully independent rooms, and we can get some feedback both from you on some questions we have at the end of the presentation, and then also general feedback as well. So I'll dive right in. So the reality for us is that while there have been incredible technical advances in other domains of machine learning, supervised machine learning is still very much the dominant paradigm for many problems we seek to solve in the world. And since it's supervised machine learning, that means we're reliant on data, and specifically labeled data that can be quite costly and expensive and require extensive domain expertise to produce. I think everyone on this call knows that in some way or another, having interacted with these tools and techniques in their own way, and maybe quite up close. We realize, though, that when we dig a little bit deeper, this problem, while sort of widely acknowledged, and everyone kind of rolls their eyes or says, well, we don't have the data to do that, or we need more data to do that, it's really much more significant and widespread than we think when you start thinking about kind of the wide expanse. So if you consider all the possible problems that we could be using machine learning to solve, all the different tasks, we really only have labeled data for a very small range of those. We see that as a foundation that works globally. It works everywhere from Kenya, East Africa on agricultural projects, to India on community health projects, to here in the US on equity and economic opportunity projects. Across that full range of problems, there really isn't labeled data for many tasks that could be classified or could be improved through classification. And second, we see that where labeled data do exist, they often represent the bias of the institutions or systems that created them. And so that could be a geographic bias where, say, a labeled data set only represents, say, a crop that is grown in one area where funders or commercial interests might have that interest, and then doesn't represent crops that are in other areas that commercial entities don't have those interests. Or it could just be, accessibility, right? If you're a medical ML researcher, it can be really difficult to negotiate data sharing agreements, and so you're going to work with the hospital you have, right? You're not going to have the time to go out and seek every possible hospital to get a representative sample. So we do, of course, have some labeled data sets. And when we went through an early interview process for this, we found that even the data sets, the sort of name brand data sets that we all know and use for benchmarking and pre-training models, we found that those data sets are often underfunded, and they're kept alive on a shoestring, despite the fact that they're used very widely for scientific practice and then for the foundation of commercial work. So across this, we said, you know, there's an opportunity here. We as funders can do something about this. And so together with Google.org and IDRC, the Rockefeller Foundation is working on launching a fund for the creation, expansion, and maintenance of equitably labeled data sets. This is something that we've been working on, you know, in theory for a little over a year now, but really in practice for just the last few months. And the idea here is, you know, often data labeling and those processes are seen as sort of afterthoughts in research funding. So it's a budget line instead of actually a whole scope of work. And we said, well, let's elevate this set of work and make it a practice, right? And we have emerging researchers who are developing data curation and data labeling, you know, as a practice and as a defined sort of set of skills and procedures. And so why not also scale up our funding and our approach to do that? The challenges we face there, of course, is, like I said, can be quite costly, and it can require, you know, a sort of long-term timeline in terms of the expertise or the pacing you might need to do these labeled data sets. And so that's why we're excited to partner with two founding funders in Google.org and IDRC, and we'll be bringing more online over the next couple months. As far as how this is structured, our initial sort of structure at launch is we're going to have a central fund, a pooled fund of money with about a 2-year horizon to try to fully deploy that $4 million amount. And we're going to do that through a series of RFPs. So you have this central fund, and then there will be a series of calls for proposals within a certain domain, and then likely within a certain geography. So our initial focus will be on sub-Saharan Africa entirely for the first RFPs. And the first one we're happy to announce will be around ag imagery, broadly defined to include both remote sensing and then also more sort of photo-based methods. This is still very early. Beyond those sort of rough contours, it's to be developed. And you'll hear a little bit more about how we're trying to do that and the sort of input we're seeking to develop that. Once RFPs are sort of launched, there'll be like a standard call, right? So teams who meet criteria can apply and propose the data sets that they want to build. And then there'll be grants provision for them to build those data sets. Now, as we think about this, there are a number of, we've filled a couple of roles, and we'll be announcing some of those, roles soon. But just to give you a broad sense of who's sort of managing this, who's running it. First, we have Meridian Institute, which we have Jennifer and Seth on the call with us today. They've been a partner to us at the foundation since early in the project, both doing research to discover where there are specific needs, how to structure governance for this, and then how to get money pooled from various funders, and to work across a wide range of legal and sort of grant administration work. They've helped us come to this sort of two-tiered governance structure, one where we have a steering committee that is represented both some of the funders on the project and also domain and technical experts who have a wide view on the space and what's needed in it. And that steering committee will provide the direction and oversight for the project. They'll select the domains for funding. They'll set a set of standard guidelines so that the application procedure is robust and standardized. And then they will select a second group called technical advisory panels. And each of these TAPs, or technical advisory panels, will be responsible for developing the RFP for specific domains. So as I described before, ag imagery, labeled ag imagery for sub-Saharan Africa. There'll be a technical advisory committee of folks who really know that space well, who understand what assets are needed, who understand the sort of particular considerations of the communities that will be building those data sets, and they'll be able to shape an effective RFP and then evaluate it in a way that gets us to funding projects that are actually useful and sustainable on the ground. So for each funding call, there will be a more specific set of criteria that adhere to that domain, right? So for ag imagery, obviously, there are some specific standards and specific sort of features in the marketplace that need to be specified in there. But if we go one level up about what type of data sets we're seeking to create here, there's sort of 4 criteria, right? So first, the data set has to tick off one of these use cases, right? So it either has to create a new high-value data set for an underserved population or problem, or it has to make an existing data set more representative and inclusive, or it can make, if there already are a data set in this area, it can make it more widely used and equitable, so more sustainable, right? So we want to keep up with each of these. We will most likely fund around A, right? We want to bring more data sets in the world, but there are scenarios where there are incredibly valuable data sets, for example, under C, that are not sustainable, and so we consider funding those as well. Second, datasets need to be useful for applied research. Here we're focused pretty closely on building datasets that have use, right? So that can be used as benchmarks for important problems or used for pre-training for sort of the near horizon, right? So there are other initiatives that are focused, on long-term, for example, labeled datasets of cellular structures, things like that, incredibly valuable. But the focus of our work here is really on this applied research, what can actually be used by researchers in the immediate and coming future. Then next, the data set has to be made openly accessible. So the good news here for sort of everyone involved is, regardless of who is selected to build certain data sets, the results will be openly accessible to the community. And here, maybe less so an issue for agriculture than other domains such as health, but we want these to be openly accessible to maximize their use while also protecting privacy. And this will be a domain by domain sort of thing to be figured out, since there are different concerns for each type of data and each type of sample. But the broad principle is, if we're going to fund it, it needs to be open and accessible for many other researchers to use around the world. And then finally, we're going to emphasize that data sets need to be locally developed and owned. This means for us, when we're talking about data sets in sub-Saharan Africa, we need to have researchers on the continent actually taking ownership of these data sets, seeing them through, producing the research. Now, we're of course open to consortia if there are teams with technical expertise around the world that want to contribute, but the lead sort of entities to be funded, we want to be really close to where the data sets are being created and where they're being labeled to ensure that long-term sustainability. As far as timeline, we began sort of formal research for this in January when Meridian came on board to start doing a set of interviews and recruitment for technical assistance committee members and steering committee members. Today, I think I'd call it a soft launch, right? So we're talking to the folks at here at CV for Ag simply because the first call will likely be in your domain. And so we want to make sure that we're bringing it to you all first and make sure that we're both getting feedback while we still have time to adjust things, and then also letting everybody know that as you think about your work, research, and needs, this is going to be an asset coming online relatively soon. We expect to launch that first RFP late spring, early summer. This timeline was pushed back a little bit because of COVID, and we want to make sure that, of course, we're not either kind of getting in the way of all the urgent and important work that is happening there. But I think at the foundation, very clearly see that on the heels of the initial COVID crisis, a food crisis is likely to be the next sort of significant harm. And so in that context, data sets that focus on food systems and agricultural systems are incredibly important. But at the foundation, of course, we are immediately focused on some health response and economic response. And so push this a little bit later, but we do expect to launch at latest June, and hopefully maybe at the end of May. The second RFP, which to be announced, will be released later in the summer, and then hopefully a third later in the year. So that brings me to the end of like the rough outline of what we're trying to do here with our little data fund. And here, I think we're going to use the remainder of the time to break out into a set of Zoom rooms, I believe, and focus on, at least for us, we need to get feedback on 5 questions. And then we also want to keep it open, right? So hopefully we'll have enough time for discussion. I hope everyone can stay for the remainder of the time. And we'll be able to take both these questions and then also any sort of broader questions that you may have, or concerns you may see, or connections you might want to make, etc. And so with that, I should also note, right here we have a URL. I think we'll share it through whatever chat mechanism we have available. But if you want to stay in touch and track the project, there's a URL here for you to sign up, and that'll lead to a MailChimp run by Meridian. And when the sort of full branding and website is launched, that'll put you on a newsletter to stay in touch about the RFPs coming up. So with that, I will pause and turn it over to Hamid for direction on how we can break out effectively into different rooms. I'll go back to the question slide as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Evan. So we are going to create 3 breakout rooms. Evan, Seth, and Jennifer will be moderating those. You will be randomly assigned to a group, so it will be some fun there to see what will be the composition of the groups. But it might ask you for a basically permission to enter the room. So if you get a notification, please confirm that. So you will get there. It might take a minute or so. We coordinate all of this, but just bear with me. So 3 rooms, almost 10, 11 people automatically. Let's do that. Just want to make
The sorting hat begins, I guess, huh?
Yeah, I just want to make sure you guys, all 3, are not in the same room. That's the thing I want to move to 1. Evan is here. And Jennifer is here. Okay, all good. Yeah, please join out the rooms.
Okay. Welcome back, everybody. I am just trying to repost the contact form in case anyone wants to stay in touch and receive more information. There we go. Okay, and Seth has reposted it. So if you look in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, you will find the form there, and go ahead and enter your information in that form, and that's a way that we'll be able to stay in touch with you. Any final questions before we close? All right. Well, go ahead.
So maybe about the timeline. When are you going to open? Also, I think early May, and then how much time does it take to approve a project?
Oh, sure. So we're actually anticipating launch in June, with the first request for proposals probably coming out in late June or early July. And then we're anticipating a 45 to 60-day window to respond to requests for proposals. And then probably another month for review after that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
Hey, Jennifer, this is Sam. Quick question. I understand that the label data and everything that is generated as a result of this RFP would be open source and would be made available to everyone.
That's
Are we
right.
expecting that the base imagery or the chips, let's say satellite imagery, do those need to be also open source? And what is the protocol in doing that? Are we going to purchasing those high resolution data sets, or are we going to be making like how would the participants go about doing that part?
It's a great question, and I think we may need to come back to you on that, but we are exploring whether there might be ways to get discounts on the underlying data sets. And looks like we have the 3rd breakout group rejoining, so I'm just gonna great, welcome back, everybody. For those who are just rejoining, we just had a question about whether the underlying imagery would be required to be open source as well as the data sets that are created, and how participants would access those. And so I might turn it back to Evan to share your thoughts on that.
For sure. So in closing, I know we're running a little over time, so I'll keep it real quick, but thank you all today for joining and sharing your feedback. Do be on the lookout for us as we release this. I think we'll be announcing both the steering committee and technical committees, as well as, you all may have noticed, an actual name for this. So we have a couple names in the hopper, and we'll have a full branding kind of rollout soon. And so please be on the lookout for that, and do apply with either yourselves, or your institutions, or in the consortium model. And thank you all again so much, and I hope you have a good rest of ICLR.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Ahmed, for hosting, and Radiant. Thank you all.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
See y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.